David Robinson sat quietly for a moment before speaking about the tension everyone in the league could feel. He said that when young Shaq entered the NBA, he didn't just want to dominate centers, he wanted respect from everyone. But there was one name that always brought a different reaction out of him. That name was Dennis Rodman. Robinson said Shaq often mentioned that Rodman wasn't just an opponent, he was a distraction. And for a player who valued focus and power, distractions became personal. That's where the dislike quietly began. Joe Dumars explained that Dennis Rodman played a psychological game long before the ball was even tipped. He didn't try to beat stars with scoring, he tried to get inside their heads. Shaq, being emotional and competitive, was the perfect target. Dumars recalled hearing that Shaq hated how Rodman turned every matchup into a mental battle. It wasn't about rebounds or defense alone. It was about attention, mind games, and control. Rodman loved chaos, and Shaq preferred order. Robinson said the frustration grew whenever Rodman guarded bigger players despite being undersized. He would front the post, grab, pull, and constantly talk. Shaq expected traditional defense, strength against strength. But Rodman refused to play that way. He used tricks, timing, and irritation instead of size. Robinson shared that Shaq once said it felt like fighting smoke instead of a man. That kind of defense didn't just challenge his body, it challenged his patience. Dumars added that Rodman's personality off the court made things even worse for Shaq. While Shaq focused on dominance and legacy, Rodman embraced controversy and attention. The hair, the headlines, the unpredictable behavior. It all clashed with Shaq's image of what a competitor should be. Dumars said Shaq respected toughness, but didn't respect distractions. To him, Rodman represented everything chaotic about the league's spotlight culture, and that difference in mindset built quiet resentment. Robinson remembered games where Rodman would ignore Shaq's strength and instead attack his rhythm. He would deny position, bump him early, and make every catch uncomfortable. Shaq could still score, but the process became frustrating. Robinson said Shaq didn't hate being challenged physically. What bothered him was being slowed down mentally. Rodman's goal wasn't to stop him completely. It was to make him uncomfortable, and discomfort was something Shaq really accepted. Dumars spoke about the psychological effect Rodman had on superstars across the league. He said Dennis studied personalities more than game film. Against Shaq, he knew emotion was a pressure point. He would laugh after fouls, talk after rebounds, and celebrate small moments. Dumars said he once heard that Shaq hated how Rodman turned serious battles into a circus. For Shaq, the game was about dominance. For Rodman, it was about disruption. Robinson said the rivalry wasn't built on a single incident, but on accumulated irritation. Every possession against Rodman felt longer, rougher, and more chaotic. Shaq would finish games with big numbers, but the path there felt exhausting. Robinson explained that Shaq once admitted Rodman didn't beat him statistically, he beat his comfort level, and for a dominant player, losing comfort felt like losing control. Dumars described how Rodman's success with championship teams only intensified the feeling. When Rodman joined Chicago and became part of another dynasty, his impact couldn't be ignored. Shaq saw a player who didn't score much, but still changed games. Dumars said that kind of influence without traditional dominance confused and irritated Shaq. He believed stars should carry teams with production. Rodman carried teams with chaos. Robinson also pointed out that Shaq valued respect among big men, especially those who played physically but straightforward. Rodman, however, blurred those lines. He played dirty at times, pushed boundaries, and tested officials constantly. Robinson said Shaq respected strength but disliked tactics that lived in gray areas. To him, Rodman didn't fight fair battles, and that perception slowly turned respect into dislike. Dumars remembered conversations around the league where players admitted Rodman could change emotions during a game. One technical foul, one reaction, and the opponent's focus would shift. Dumars said Shaq hated that loss of emotional control more than any rebound Rodman grabbed, because once emotion entered the game, Rodman had already won part of the battle, and Shaq knew it. Robinson explained that the media attention Rodman received also played a role. While Shaq was building his brand through dominance and championships, Rodman was gaining headlines through controversy and personality. Robinson said Shaq believed attention should come from performance, not spectacle. Seeing Rodman celebrated for chaos instead of production didn't sit well with him. It felt like the league rewarded the wrong things. Dumars added that despite the dislike, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of Rodman's impact. Players who faced him regularly knew his value went beyond statistics. But for Shaq, appreciation didn't erase frustration. Dumars said Shaq could respect Rodman's results, while still hating the experience of playing against him. Respect and dislike existed at the same time. Robinson said what truly defined the tension was control. Shaq's game was about imposing his will physically and mentally. Rodman's game was about taking that control away in small moments. Every denial, every bump, every distraction chipped at that dominance. Robinson explained that Shaq didn't just hate Rodman the player. He hated what Rodman did to his rhythm. Dumars described how teammates often noticed Shaq becoming more emotional when Rodman was involved. Not angry enough to lose control completely, but irritated enough to feel it. Dumars said that reaction alone showed Rodman's effectiveness. Because when a dominant player thinks about the opponent instead of the game, the opponent has already succeeded. Robinson concluded that the dislike was never personal in a traditional sense. There were no major fights or public feuds defining it. Instead, it was the constant mental pressure Rodman created over time. Shaq hated the experience, the chaos, and the discomfort, and sometimes that kind of rivalry runs deeper than any single moment. Dumars finished by saying that in a strange way, the dislike was also a form of respect. Because players only hate the opponents who truly affect them. Rodman didn't overpower Shaq, and he didn't outscore him, but he made the most dominant big man think, react, and feel uncomfortable. And for someone like Shaq, that was enough to turn a competitor into someone he never enjoyed facing. Robinson went on to explain that the tension between Shaq and Rodman became more visible. During high-stakes matchups, in big games, Rodman would increase his physical pressure even more, pushing, leaning, and fighting for every inch of space. Shaq expected intensity, but Rodman added irritation to that intensity. Every possession felt like a personal challenge rather than just another play. Robinson said Shaq hated when the game stopped feeling clean, because when the rhythm broke, Rodman's influence grew. Dumars said Rodman also understood the power of timing. He didn't try to frustrate Shaq on every play, only at key moments. A hard front in the post, a quick pull on the arm, or a loud reaction after a rebound would come when the game's momentum was shifting. Dumars explained that Shaq believed dominance meant controlling those moments, but Rodman kept stealing them in small ways. That ability to disrupt timing stayed in Shaq's mind. Robinson remembered hearing that Shaq often complained about the way officials handled Rodman. Dennis had built a reputation for pushing limits without always getting called. He knew how far he could go before the whistle came. Robinson said Shaq felt he had to fight through contact that others didn't face. That sense of unfairness only added to the frustration. That frustration was exactly what Rodman wanted. Dumars also spoke about Rodman's energy level, which never seemed to drop. Even late in games, when big men usually slowed down, Rodman was still fighting for position. He chased rebounds like the game depended on every bounce. Dumars said Shaq respected effort, but he hated when effort turned into constant annoyance. There was no break when Rodman was on the floor. The pressure never relaxed. Robinson explained that another reason for the dislike was how Rodman affected team dynamics. When Shaq became irritated, opponents often sensed it and increased their physical play. One player's frustration could shift the tone of the entire game. Robinson said Rodman didn't just challenge Shaq individually. He changed the emotional temperature of the floor, and that made his impact feel bigger than his role. Dumars added that Rodman's reputation followed him even before the game started. Teams talked about him in scouting reports differently than other players. It wasn't just about rebounding numbers or defensive schemes. Coaches warned players to stay calm and avoid reacting. Dumars said Shaq hated that mental preparation was even necessary, because it meant Rodman's influence began before tip-off. Robinson said the rivalry also reflected a clash of basketball identities. Shaq represented power, structure, and physical dominance. Rodman represented unpredictability, chaos, and emotional pressure. When those styles met, the game became uncomfortable rather than controlled. Robinson explained that Shaq wanted to impose order on every matchup. Rodman's entire purpose was to break that order. Dumars mentioned that over time, the stories about Rodman's impact spread across the league. Younger players heard veterans talk about how exhausting it was to deal with him. When Shaq repeated that he hated playing Rodman, it wasn't just frustration talking, it was a shared experience. Many stars understood. Dumars said Rodman earned that reputation through years of mental warfare. Robinson reflected that what made the situation unique was that Rodman didn't need to dominate statistically to leave a mark. He could finish with few points and still be one of the most talked about players after the game. For Shaq, whose dominance was measured in numbers and force, that contrast was difficult to accept. Robinson said it felt like Rodman changed the story without changing the scoreboard. Dumars closed by saying that in the end, Shaq's dislike was the ultimate proof of Rodman's effectiveness. When one of the most powerful players in NBA history openly admitted he hated facing someone, it meant that player had found a way to matter. Rodman didn't overpower Shaq, and he didn't outplay him statistically, but he made the experience uncomfortable, emotional, and exhausting. And in the world of competition, that kind of impact lasts longer than any stat line.